Thank you. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, everybody, for being here. It's a pleasure and an honor, and it's been a complete blast for the past day and a half. It's awesome to be here. I love traveling to Ukraine. I love presenting here. It's always a great audience. I know that we have people today here from all over the place. Let's do a bit of gymnastics after lunch. Who is not from the Ukraine here? See, one hand, two hands. Okay, don't be shy. I'm not going to bite you. Unless you are, I don't know. Okay, not too many hands. Anyway, still, everybody is really welcome. I'm going to say, look, we have 40 minutes for the whole thing. I'm going to try to be quick with the slides. There's a bit of detail, hopefully enough for you, but if you have questions, I don't mind taking them straight away, but I think it will make more sense if you just write them down, and we'll save some time at the end to make sure that I answer all of them. And of course, you can catch me afterwards. We can talk about anything you like. Right, we got the slides. We can probably begin. And I'm also probably going to get a bit closer to you because I feel like I'm on a spaceship somewhere really far away. It's amazing to know that during this DevFest, we have such a really well-packed web track. Especially amazing for me because I've spent the past several years of my life dedicated to the web and everything that works and doesn't work on the web. And the last year, this has been my main focus. Of course, the topic of our conversation today, accelerated mobile pages, has become an essential part of the web. And hopefully, you're here because you're interested about the web, you're in the web, you're passionate about it. Let me ask you another question. Who here is not a web developer? Good, because I was going to ask you to leave. No. It's awesome. It's really amazing to know that so many people are involved in building great websites and web experiences. I'm not going to do a whole different presentation about the web, just talking about how great it is and how much it has progressed in the past couple of years. But let me just say this very briefly. We used to have this notion just a very few years ago, and some people still do, that the mobile web and the web in general is just something from back in the 80s, when we had big, chunky PCs on our desktops, and we opened basically two things. The browser for, that thing that I'm not going to say, and then also maybe for news, and probably Tetris, right? And then we got mobile phones, and then there's that whole downstairs is packed with AR and VR, and all that stuff is kind of just moving along, and the web is somewhere behind. That is not true. The web has kind of fallen back a little bit as all the new platforms have emerged. It has caught up. Over the past couple of years, things have really changed. You got APIs and you got capabilities on the web right now that allow you to access your users and your consumers, your readers, through any device using the web as a platform. And we're going to touch upon a very small part of it today, but hopefully an interesting part. That is to do with how you create a surface for your web content that is amazingly fast, regardless of what device and what network conditions your visitors and your users have. And it's called accelerated mobile pages. There is 4 parts to today, through which we're going to go reasonably fast, especially the first 3 ones, and then maybe focus a little bit on the last one. I'll tell you, in case you didn't know, what AMP is, and we'll talk about why it's so amazingly fast. Quick mention of way it can be used in case you have any doubts about its applicability across different surfaces that exist on the web. And then finally, the most interesting part, what you can build using AMP. Let's kick it off. But before I tell you, does anybody know what AMP is? Good. You don't count. Okay, so a few hands, but a few hands didn't rise, so that's interesting. Hopefully this will be useful for you. Those of you who raised your hand, don't be shy. Tell me, what do you think it is? Like, first of all, what does it stand for? Accelerated mobile pages, exactly right. And what is it? That is almost exactly right. That is like 99% right. It is definitely Google-backed. the thing to remember about it, it's not Google owned, it's owned by you. It's owned by everybody who works on the web. And I think if there's one thing you remember is that forget everything, and if you forget everything I say today, remember that there's a GitHub repository where you absolutely need to go to check it out completely and see what's missing, and then build it. Because this is the most important thing. It is fundamentally a library, although it is so much more than just a library. It's also an approach, it's almost a philosophy of how you should build great web experiences. But it's a library not just for building responsive websites, it's a library for building beautiful websites. It's a library for building beautiful web experiences, regardless of the platform. You can build fully functional websites in any vertical that will work amazingly well on any surface. The Spiegel Daily example behind me is a German magazine who've converted their entire experience into AMP. They don't have any other versions of the website. That's what it is. And it works amazingly well on mobile. In some ways, it works even better on desktop. AMP, and you rightly pointed out a few of the components, consists of three things. Hopefully, they're easy to remember. It's a subset of HTML, but also a little bit of a superset because it limits you in what you can use out of everything that's possible in HTML, but also offers you a few new things which are not generally available. They become possible because there's a JavaScript library which enables them, and it's a centralized, unique, single library that is not forked, at least up until now, anywhere, and that ensures that everybody who uses it, both developers and platforms, can rely on the components inherent and sort of comprising that library. And finally, you also mentioned caching. Now, caching is a funny one a little bit because it's not fundamentally sort of necessary or inbuilt component of AMP. It's just something that a platform can use in addition to make the experience for the platform's users even better. In Google's case, Google Search uses AMP cache to make sure that we give our users who've seen your content in our search results even faster. Other companies are working on building their caches. Some other caches already exist. Some new might appear. So they might have slightly different functionalities. They might have slightly different benefits or drawbacks. But the most important thing to remember here is that you don't need to go through any sort of cache to land on an AMP page. In fact, saying AMP page is kind of crazy because P is for page. I can't help it. You can send a link to an AMP HTML URL to anybody through any medium, and they will be able to open it in any browser, right? They don't have to go through a cache. It will be great if they do because it will be even faster, but it just works anyway. So let's go through the three components in a bit more detail. AMP is fast, and we're going to go back to why it's fast, but this is one of the major reasons. Because it doesn't allow things, well, this is a little bit obvious, but still, it's good to mention. It doesn't allow things that are slow to be part of the pages that you build. It's kind of an obvious thing when you think about it, but then somehow over the past 10 years, we forgot about it, right? And when we started creating web pages at first, they were full of text, and somebody came up with the bright idea of putting images, and then the images turned into animated GIFs, and then somebody said we should track this with analytics, and then somebody said, well, you know what, we actually have 10 different analytics providers, and they all have different advantages, so let's put all of the trackers on there. What about advertising? And now I know this great Java frame that we need to put there as well, and then there's this great game that we need to build on Flash, and it has to work there too, and by the end, you can't open this page anymore, because it takes half an hour, and nobody has the time. So you can't do that with them. We'll go back to that in a second. Let's focus a little bit, and I'll go through this reasonably fast, or what AMP HTML actually is and what it contains. Don't try to read this. This is not specifically for you to read. You define the type of the document at first, right? Easy. You need to say, and you can use either the Lightning sign or HTML AMP as a document type. I much prefer the Lightning because it's just so much cooler. Go for it, absolutely. Use it. In fact, use it everywhere. Just don't even use it in AMP documents. Just put it in everything that you do. Just put a Lightning. It just makes everything better. The next thing that you do, and this is an important part if you care about discoverability of your AMP pages. In fact, without this, they will not even be valid. But it is especially important if you want to have search engines and other platforms understand what's going on with your website. You need to specify where the canonical version of the AMP page is and what it is. But as you saw before with the Daily Spiegel example, you might not have another version of the page. AMP might just be the one version of the page. In that case, it's totally fine to self-reference the AMP page in the canonical, under the canonical tag. Just don't forget to do it. It has to be there. Like, it doesn't need to have the second link, but it does need to say what the canonical is. I mean, it doesn't need to have the second one if it's the only one that you have. You get the point. Don't read this. This is just basically to illustrate CSS inlining. Right? You have a style component, and you say, well, there's all the sorts of styles that I need to use, and you build that into the head straight away, because, importantly, you can't use external CSS, right? And you have a limitation here of about 50 kilobytes on how much you can write. In fact, of exactly 50 kilobytes. And importantly, you need to reference the JavaScript library. Again, it's the only one that exists, and hopefully will remain that way. There's different approaches to this. I've heard people clamor for separate versions, but the reason we are pushing really hard to keep it as it is, as a single repository, is because it makes your life as developers easier. You don't need to keep track of all the different forks that exist in different places to make sure that your pages work properly. You just have the one thing, you reference it, and everything just magically works. And then that's it. You can say hello world, and actually you can say here whatever the hell you want, just like you would with any other HTML page. JavaScript. We're not going to get into the details. Who is disappointed? Who loves JavaScript? Yeah, see? Full of hands. Full of hands. Not you, I know, but full of hands. Good, I also love JavaScript. It's horrible, and real programmers tell me that it has all sorts of drawbacks, but it's so easy and so easy to read and understand. You can't probably do anything interesting with it, but you can build beautiful, responsive experiences on the web, and that's all I care about. It's there. That's where it lives, right? You can go check it out. In fact, as I told you, just remember the one thing you need to remember. It's all on GitHub. Just go there. It controls how your resources load. It controls what components you can actually put on the page and their performance. And it controls the optimization of the performance of those components. And we'll get into a little bit of the detail when we talk about why AMP is so fast. And the final component, which, as I mentioned before, is optional. And also here I mentioned Google AMP Cache because, as has been mentioned during the introduction, I work at Google, so we kind of care about that one the most. But it doesn't have to be the only one. So it's any kind of cache, really. You know how CDN and caches work, so I won't dwell on it too much. But the one thing that is important here, and I'll come back to it in a second when I talk about the news in AMP over the past few months, because we control, Google controls that particular cache, our engineers keep working constantly on making it better, on introducing new compression algorithms, new modifications into it to make it even faster and make rendering even better and get your content to your users in an even more seamless and incredibly fast way. Second part, and we're still good on time. Why is AMP fast? I think from the description of what it is, this should start becoming reasonably obvious, right? Well, there's the fundamental reason because it's not slow. So that's a good one. But there's a few more details to that. And the list goes on. It's impolite to put a lot of text on a slide and not give people the time to read it. I'm not going to spend any amount of time on going into everything here in detail. In fact, there is a second slide just like this. And in theory, I could put about 5 more, and I didn't, because I value your time, and also I get bored by this. I'll focus on just a few examples to give you an idea of what goes on and what can also happen, and in fact, are good programming practices. And you can do that on your own. Let me, in fact, take a bracket and just step aside from the presentation for a second. It is completely true that as a great web developer, you can build a faster experience for your users. You can build a page that runs much faster than an AMP page. You can even go as far as saying, in fact, if you create a page that consists solely of text and has no markup at all, it will load lightning fast. And we recognize that, and we encourage you to not just adopt AMP as a format for everything that you do, but in fact to learn from it, to improve on it, to maybe even come up with something that works even better. But the idea here is that for the vast majority of web developers out there, and for the vast majority even of web resource owners, it is quite hard. to develop amazing, fast, smooth experiences. And not less importantly, for platforms where this content can surface, it is hard to rely on the behavior of the components in those pages. Like, you don't know what JavaScript is going to load, you don't know what it's going to do, like what pop-ups are going to appear, and so on. With AMP, we can, and that allows us to do certain great things. So let's focus on a couple. First of all, static resource sizing. What this means is that you specify the size of everything that will be rendered on your page. Right? Not of the actual images that you show, but where they're going to appear and how much space that's going to take up. That means that we, on the other hand, and any other platform, in fact, can then render this page before it gets seen by the user's browser and already specify where everything is going to be. And then bring in the exactly right size of the image, not rely on the browser to get the full 500 megabytes raw format image and then try to somehow compress it and spend 5 minutes doing that, but actually prepare the page completely, find exactly the right sized image to put in that box and give it to the user ready in the first instance, like within a second. We also look after resource prioritization. This means that when we cache the page, we take a look at what's on it. Analytics tags, advertising tags, other components, and we try to figure out which ones does the user need to see first, like which ones in fact appear at the top of the page, and which ones are important for the user's experience the most. Because we care about the users as much, hopefully, as you do, and we care about them more than about some of the other participants of the ecosystem, because the user experience here is critical. So for example, here we will make sure that ads do not interfere and are not loaded before your page's critical content. They will load, and they will load amazingly fast as well, but they will load when the time is right. And as I mentioned a couple of times already, we pre-render. So that little box at the top, the illustration, that arrives on a user's client just as they're going to see it already. And that allows us to, I'll repeat myself, and I'll probably do this a couple more times, to do this within a second under most conditions. This is about the news that I promised to you. Over the last year, we made it twice as fast. Talking specifically here about AMP surfacing or being serviced from our search results, but we care about that a lot. So we improved how we compress images losslessly, and we introduced our much-loved Brotli compression, and we don't need to go into the details of that. Basically, read up what Brotli compression is. It's really interesting. We now use it in AMP cache to make all your stuff shrink even further without losing anything that's important for your users. Third part, where it's used, and this is going to be the fastest part, because it's just like this. It's used everywhere. And the number of platforms that use it, the number of platforms that create AMP pages is amazingly large. We have billions of AMP pages available already. But this is important because this illustrates, again, it's not just Google search. In fact, I don't even remember if the Google logo is there. It would be weird if it wasn't. But it's everybody else as well. It's other search engines, it's social networks. It's a new logo will appear here that some of you might care about to a slightly larger or less or smaller extent. I hear that it's sometimes unavailable in this locality, but I also hear there are ways of still getting to it. VK, in fact, they have announced just recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, that by the end of the year they will launch full support for AMP pages on their iOS and Android applications and their mobile website. Meaning that if a user shares a link that has an AMP equivalent, they will serve the AMP equivalent of that link. And they're not alone. Like you see examples there, some of the Chinese text you see there, there are Chinese social networks, so it's all over the place. It's all the way from the US across to China, passing through over here, and it works. And now the most interesting thing. What can you in fact build with AMP? Do you want a spoiler? Yes. Well, okay, so guess. Anything, everything. Thank you. Give the man a round of applause. Come on. Woo! But before we go into the details of everything and give you some examples, let me dwell on this for just 1 second. What can't you build with AMP? Who doesn't like cat photos? Oh, you like dog photos? You like other animals? Well, okay, horses. Well, imagine this as a horse. It's a very furry horse. And Shetland ponies could look kind of like that. And so you like land on this amazing, beautiful page where you see photos of your favorite animal and you want to go, I want more of this. And then kind of your content shifts just as you're about to tap on it. And there's this other horrible animal that you don't like. But your finger is already there. And it's too late. And oh no. Right? You can't do that with AMP. This is as simple as that. Stuff doesn't shift around. What you tell us in advance where everything is going to be is exactly what your user is going to get. So we breathe out and we are happy that we can always watch the photos and videos and everything of our favorite animals. Let's go into a bit more detail about what you can in fact build with AMP. And as you correctly guessed, it's everything. We started off, and you might still have this not sort of a misconception, but we started off a couple of years ago working on this initiative, primarily at first with representatives of the news industry. Because they were kind of coming to us saying, like, people don't read our shit. I said, well, maybe your shit is shit. No, our stuff is awesome, but like, they don't read it. I said, okay, well, let's try to read it. And then you open it and you go, well, where's your shit? Like, it's not loading. Well, maybe that's why they don't read it, because it's not loading. That could be a reason, fair enough. So we sat down with them and said, okay, fair enough, let's just fix this. And that's how the format was born. Out of a collaboration, at first with the news industry, to provide them with a way to fix their long-standing issues where they at first didn't understand that the web existed, then they didn't believe it. So, the 5 stages. They didn't believe it, then they were angry about it, then they accepted it, and then they built pages that don't load. And then somehow we came through to a solution. But it was obvious to us from the very beginning that this is a solution for any single possible type of content. So we were not going to stay exclusively focused on news, and we immediately started working on introducing components that provide the functionality for any kind of content, for any kind of service. This is an example from a shopping site that you might have heard of. It just goes to say that speed increases are critical for any kind of conversions. I don't know how much, as web developers, you care about conversions. You probably relegate that to your marketing folks. But, sort of spare a thought for those guys. They try to work hard and they earn you money. So it's important that your users actually get to where, as a company, as a service, you're trying to get them to. And getting them there fast seems to be a good thing from a business perspective. Let's focus on a few things that you can do. It is, first of all, as a concept. I don't want to, for example, say that Lightbox and Carousel in and of themselves are the best thing you can do on AMP. They're definitely great. But this is more to illustrate the fact that when you combine components, you can create amazingly powerful, interesting, interactive, engaging experiences. You can have galleries with pagination, galleries that are responsive, that, that do all sorts of funky stuff. And you don't have to limit yourself with just 2 components. You can package them one inside another and get better functionality. Another example is that from the beginning, you could sort of use the AMP form component to create shopping experiences, because you can definitely create a search using that, and you can definitely create a shopping cart or some sort of a way of filling a shopping cart by having a form and a list, right? And that worked. What didn't work so well here is that you couldn't really, at first, solve the problem of all your stuff being pre-cached somewhere, and us having to get to it and change what's being shown every time a user did something on your page. Well, not anything, but in particular when they tried to select something and change the way, the pricing or some other aspect of the thing that you're interacting with. So we worked on introducing mBind. I'm not going to ask you again, because not that many people heard of, well, not everybody heard of AMP in the beginning, so I presume even fewer have specifically heard of mBind. If you want to start building with AMP, I would first learn the basics, and then straight away the next thing I would learn is mBind, because this is probably the most exciting thing in my perspective that has happened to AMP in the past year. Let's dwell on it therefore for a second. It's comprised of 3 things again that you need to remember. Well, not sort of remember, but kind of get into your head and then understand how it works. you store all the data. It doesn't have to be a product, but like anything that can conceivably change states. Right? The user doesn't need to buy it. They can, I don't know, save it, whatever, send it, doesn't matter. So you put it into a box, you say what its parameters are, right? You bind text to the label of that thing, right? And you say, you know, the selected color is what I'm binding to. And then you can change that variable with the set state, like this, which then allows you this. Every time a user interacts with an element of the page, we grab the variables corresponding to that state without having to go to the server or even to the cache for all of the content. We just grab exactly that part of it and can surface it immediately. So the whole experience, being able to see it, you see, if you pay attention, you see that not only the pictures or the size availability, but also the price changes. So you can control all of that. And in fact, with a bit more creativity, and as I said, you should always think about combining AMP components. You can even make sure that, for example, price and availability are provided dynamically. So certain things you can do with AMP bind, then you would add, for example, AMP list that allows you to ping the server for the most updated version, and then you would be always sure that your user sees exactly what you want them to see and interacts with exactly you want them to interact with. You can read more about it over there, but in fact you can find this and many more examples at ampbyexample.com. So by all means, that's a big reference point. So ampproject.org is the home of the project. It's kind of more for marketing purposes, less interesting for you. Go straight to ampbyexample.com. All the components are listed there. You can play around. You can see them, both the code and the demo versions, and play around with all of that. A few of the more recent things that have just launched, and I think we'll be kind of moving towards your questions there. We just launched animations, right? It's a thin layer on top of web animations that allows you to do more complex stuff than you would otherwise be able to do with just CSS animations. I think just 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, on the 30th of September, we've announced the live launch of the Position Observer. It just allows you to do cool stuff, I think, right? I'm sick of technical jargon. It's just cool stuff. You see the parallax effect with the rocket. I'm not sure if, well, hopefully at the back you can also see it, right? You can see the hand of the clock moving, the cube rotating based on what the user is doing on the page. And we'll keep building on that and addressing other APIs other than just the position of the user on the page to be able to control what's actually happening there. So you have a lot of new possibilities and a lot of possibilities that are already there. We have great examples, and I've shown you Daily Spiegel in the beginning. We have examples of pages built solely on AMP. We have examples of projects that use AMP as an entry point. We have even examples of pages using AMP as content units for the rest of the experience, where they have AMP pages that are standalone and can work on their own, but also populate the content of other pages. Imagine, I don't know, for example, you have landing pages that are AMPs, but then you also have product categories, and you can drag the content from your AMP pages into those product categories. It's not here because probably would make us run out of time, but a thing to remember and maybe look up and explore a little bit is Shadow DOM. Shadow, like shadow, and DOM, like Dominic, but not really. Check it out and see how we use, or you can use rather, the combination of this approach with AMP to fully integrate AMP into any web experience that you already have. And surprise, or not, this is the last slide, right? And we have about 10 minutes for your questions. This is also an invitation, right? This is, normally people put a thank you. I'm just going to say thank you. But wait, you'll applaud at the end. Or you don't have to anyway. This is more important, right, to pay attention. November the 7th is the first roadshow in Europe, in Munich. And then over the course of the next few days, there will be 3 more, going through Paris, Madrid, and finally in London. There's going to be a big party, or rather a boring conference. Well, depends on you, if you go or not. It's completely open to register. You can go to this link and register now. If you can travel in November, it would be amazing. Most of the folks working on evangelizing it, a lot of the folks working on developing it are going to be present at either all of those locations or some of those locations. Check out the list of speakers on the website. So now again, thank you for listening to me. I welcome your questions and hope to see you at the roadshows as well.